Trove's combat and how you build classes can be broken up into 3 categories. Speed farming, where you're trying to complete dungeons as fast as possible, which means you need to have a class that has a good base movement speed and you will be sacrificing damage for more speed. Delves, which is a combination of damage and health. In most cases, you need to be really tanky to be able to survive the long, drawn-out gauntlet. And Leviathans are all about damage. You don't need to survive if you can kill it before it kills you. The efficiency of a class can basically be broken down into these 3 categories. Some will be stronger than others in one area and weaker in another. Another video of mine that I would recommend is the classes cheat sheet. It's basically a visual graph that kind of shows where each character fits in the spectrum. At the end of it all, I would always recommend that you play the class that you enjoy, rather than picking something specifically because it's efficient. So assuming you've picked out your main, let's get started with the more detailed tutorial. So the Bard is one of those weirder classes in Trove that a lot of people like, but certain people it just doesn't really vibe with. I'm one of the latter. I just don't really know why, but I don't find this class to be particularly fun, probably because the majority of its gameplay is you balancing all of the various attacks so that you can keep your Bard's song up. It's a very technical class, which is why some people really enjoy it, and those that don't like it at all. So checking out the subclass abilities, there's a couple different options, namely the same ones that we've always seen, which is going to be the Lunacy, because it'll end up triggering, which makes you go big, and then it gives you more movement speed and more damage. And the Bard is kind of primarily used as a speed farmer, but you can actually use it pretty effectively on bosses too. You wouldn't really think so. Knight subclass ability is good for that extra Flask capacity, especially if you want big bursts of damage. Your mount movement speed is going to be kind of irrelevant because so long as you have your Bard song going at all times, you're gonna be a speedy boy. And then of course, the super easy subclass that everyone uses for almost anything is gonna be the Phoenix Fire Solarian subclass, just because of that extra light value. But in this case, it's kind of a pick your poison type of thing. A couple things you might want to experiment with is the Pirate Captain subclass ability, and even the Fey Trickster subclass ability are surprisingly strong. As for your gear stat priority, you're going to be focusing on attack speed, because that's going to be how you optimize more damage, essentially your damage per second DPS, and movement speed, because that's primarily where this class is going to shine, is with speed farming as quick as possible. Now, if you absolutely want to use it as a boss killer or use it at the end game, you're instead going to swap that movement speed out for crit damage on your gear, because having higher crit damage means you have more overall damage, and movement speed isn't really helping towards that damage goal. It's just helping you get from point A to point B faster. Now, as for the Bard's Crystal Ring effect, you've got the 3 different options. Peaceful Moment, so Peaceful Song buff reduces damage done to allies. Who cares about that? Everyone's tanky in this game anyways, or the enemies damage you so much that that buff is worthless. Musical Master, the Bard gains a critical damage buff when all 3 Bard songs are active, which is probably going to end up being the biggest one that you want to go for. It depends how much the crit damage buff is. And then there's Overload, so at max melody, gain a small damage boost. As far as I know, Overload is the best one for your Crystal Ring ability, but it does also require the most effort in terms of gameplay. As for your best banner in slot, I mean, frankly speaking, it's just going to end up being the usual banners that you would expect, the Permatorch, the Leviathan torches just in general, but you're actually going to be focusing on the magic damage Permatorches, because here's the crazy thing is, even though the Vanguardian uses a fist weapon and it's physical damage, when you're playing as the Bard and you equip a fist weapon, it's going to automatically swap to magic damage. So I would recommend the Saber Skull, Sabris Skull? I don't know. 500 magic damage, a little bit of movement speed. That's the big thing for me. Again, I always prioritize movement speed. You do have a couple different options for your ally. Namely, you can end up using the mini water mana beast because of the sheer amount of damage that it'll give you. So coming from the hub, you'll go down into here, and you gotta get pretty high into the mystic arts in order to craft this, but this is going to end up being the magic crit damage ally. Starry Skyfire, which is out of the star chart, because this is going to end up giving you magic damage, light, cooldown recovery speed, which honestly isn't super important on the Bard. From here in the hub, you go all the way up to the top of the Astrolabe and the Grand Orrery, and then way over here is going to be Starry Skyfire, which you're going to inevitably get anyways because you have to get the light node out of the skill tree. There is also Orchid out of the Paragon, and this is going to end up being your movement speed buff when a nearby enemy dies. So coming from the hub over into the Paragon basement here, this is where you would end up crafting Orchid. As far as how you would end up building the skill tree, it's pretty much going to be unanimously the same across all classes, but keep in mind I do prioritize movement speed. So first and foremost, you would get the Life Leech node, which is going to make pretty much all of your classes like way tankier, if not invincible. Then you would end up getting the movement speed nodes, the light nodes, and the damage nodes. Of course, the main difference between my skill tree and your skill tree would be that you would actually prioritize the magic damage. My skill tree is set up for physical damage. As for your flasks, these are pretty much just the best options for you, honestly speaking. You can use Elysian Bandolier if you need to have more flask capacity for bursts and bursts of damage, which is usually good for boss killing and Leviathans and such. But otherwise, I always use Death Defying because I'm lazy and because endgame enemies hit so ridiculously hard that you kind of need that survivability because the enemies will usually just one-shot you because this game's an unbalanced mess. There are a couple different options though. I guess Vial of Unleashed Power could probably work except for the internal cooldown. I remember that this Vial used to actually be really, really good back in the day, but I think it got a nerf or something like a couple years back. I haven't used it since. But maybe it's still viable, I don't know. And then otherwise, Conjurer's Crucible is a good one for long-term farming. So long as you have the magic find, you'll just keep getting your flask back. Oh my God, pardon me, I have such a massive headache right now. Okay, so for emblems, yeah, Arcane Emblem would be a must just because of how much damage you need to do to a lot of these enemies and so on and so forth. You can use Trailblazing for a speed farming emblem. Again, can end up being quite important. And then otherwise, Unyielding Emblem if you need survivability to tank hits from enemies and such. And then there's also Sure Strike if you're earlier on in the game and you don't have enough crit damage, or sorry, crit hit. As for the mid-game stat goal that you would aim for, probably around 80,000 magic damage at the base value, not like the additive or whatever. And then your crit hit you want to have at 50 to 60% at the very least. Higher than that is still better. And then your crit damage at around 800%. Again, this is just a mid-tier goal. Just if you notice that one of your stats is kind of lacking in that regard, that's where you would just end up bringing it up. But when you get further into the end game, it's kind of a little bit more nuanced than that. But generally speaking, you just bring the stats up from there and focus on getting your hands on 100% crit hit as soon as possible, because it's going to make the biggest difference. And before we get into the gems, I'm just going to say this because I gotta say it in every one of these videos. Before you even focus on your PR or making your character stronger, get your character to max level. So many people are always like, how can I make myself stronger? And then they're like level 25 or something. Getting max level will unlock all of the gem slots, allowing you to equip gems to every single one of your gem slots, thus giving you the highest boost of power and damage and PR that you can possibly end up getting outside of various other mechanics in the game. But my point being is you gotta get your class maxed out first. This also isn't a guide for nerds focusing on coefficiency or anything. I'll have one of those guides sometime in the future, but needless to say that each of the different classes has slightly varying stats in their starting position and when they're max level and such. And so the stats that you would pick for that specific character are usually that specific character's most coefficient stats, and it wouldn't apply to any of the others, which means we would have to do this whole song and dance rigmarole all over again, where I make guides on every single character. Suffice to say, coefficiency doesn't matter as much as people pretend that it does, unless you're doing like super deep delves or being with like one of the best groups in the game or something. And if you'll pardon me, I'm gonna swap over to my Draco because that's where I have all of my gems. First, let's start out with the colored, not cosmic gems, the colored lesser gems. So 3 of the 6 lesser gems, I would say to get 2 boosts to magic damage, 1 boost crit damage, no boost crit hit. And then the other 3 gems are going to end up being 2 boost crit damage, 1 boost magic damage, no boost crit hit. Any variety between that isn't going to make that much of a difference, so go ham, mix it up. You can see I've got this one gem that's got 3 boosts in crit damage. It's not a big deal. The main thing that I would say is once you end up having 100% crit hit, then you can start cycling that stat off of your gems in favor of max health. Now, as for your empowered colored gems, those would end up being the same as the first 3 lesser gems. So 2 boost magic damage, 1 boost crit damage, no boost crit hit. Whereas the cosmic gems will all unanimously have all 3 boosts into light and then no boosts into crit damage and magic damage. This includes both the lesser gems and the empowered gem. As for the empowered gem abilities, the class gem ability is a must. So the Bard has increased attack range and Bard's songs increase effectiveness. Wish that we ended up having more like actual game statistics that the game would tell us about these things, but I mean, either way, it's just a must. Then for the other empowered gems, I would suggest Pyrodis, just because speed farming is a big deal. And then otherwise you can kind of just choose whatever you want for the last gem. It's not as important as you would think because none of the era gems really affect you that much. I've heard that the flower one can secretly be really good, but I don't know if that's like a specific thing to the Bard or whatever. Cubic Curtain will give you a lot more survivability though. And the cosmic gem, that kind of depends on how you want to use the Bard. I would say that if you're speed farming and not focusing on going to long shade or end game difficulties, Vampirium can be useful. The Vampirium gem will give you lifesteal, which you won't need because the lifesteal you get out of the skill tree, but it will also give you movement speed, which can be invaluable if you're just speed farming. However, if you're going to the end game, if you're, in it for the long haul, so to speak, with the Bard, then you would use Berserk Battler, because that's just going to end up increasing your light as you damage enemies and thus give you more damage that you kind of need for the end game. And that's pretty much going to end up covering the Bard. The only things that I could say outside, I kind of like to fourth wall break with the end of these videos and be a little more candid with you guys. I've been taking a little bit of a break from Trove. Sorry, it's just been, I've been feeling really burnt out. Most of all, the wife and I have been doing a lot of baby stuff, which I'll talk about soon, but it's kind of boring, just adult things. It's not like, oh, super exciting, outside of the gender reveal, which I still haven't had a video on yet. But anyways, I've been experimenting with other types of videos and content and stuff like that. So that's been a lot of fun for me. But it has also meant that I needed to kind of take a little bit of a break from this, which means that because I'm not just trying to have Trove up every single day, I should be able to get the Solarian guide out sooner rather than later. That's kind of my hope, but I don't know, no promises. I'm kind of excited that this series of videos is kind of coming to an end though, because I've got a lot of other videos that a lot of other ideas that I've been wanting to do with Trove videos, but this whole project of tackling all 18 classes over the year has just been something that has taken pretty much all of my brain capacity when it comes to Trove stuff. Anyways, with all of that said, I appreciate you watching. Hope you enjoyed. Smash like, sub for more. Buy the merch if you want to support the channel. You don't have to, but again, it is the cheapest that it has ever been. And I would just very much appreciate your support and comments down below.